I'll call this month's board meeting to order. 10:03.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for having me back. And my colleague Julie VP is also here. Julie is the visual facilitator, so she's going to be doing captures of the conversations that we're going to have today. But when we were here in June, we kind of were very focused on the strategic plan and the session that we had with the boards and commissions. And this is really the time for you all to talk about working together. So I think that Tom is the only new to the group person. But I think Malcolm kind of came in mid-cycle, so he didn't participate in a governance retreat. He was at the strategic planning retreat, but missed the governance retreat. And I think Brooke was virtual for her first time. So it's a nice opportunity to have you all in the same room. And I know you were focusing on your agenda for what's next, and just kind of like, take a deep breath and talk about how it's going to be to kind of work together. So our plan for today is to go through those questions that we had sent with the agenda, kind of what the intentional governance conversation about working together. And then we'll have a conversation about the board's meeting, just to kind of check in, see if there's anything we need to tweak there. And then a quick conversation about the strategic plan in preparation of the retreat that we have. And I guess, Eric, you can go ahead. You want to show our slides, yeah? And then we'll get you out of here by a few minutes before 1, so you can get to where you need to be. So let's just go ahead and start with what your hopes and expectations are for this conversation. I'll invite everyone to participate in that and in answering that. Just kind of, what are you looking for this morning? Anyone can just jump right in and we'll go around from there. Okay, thank you. Brooke.
Never afraid to talk. So for me, governance feels like a process. It's more process oriented than. So how do we decide what our priorities are? In some ways, or even what we do week to week.
Yes.
So now that, I'm with Dawn planning the agendas, hearing from my fellow board members about how do they want to spend their time and how do we do that in agenda planning for me.
Excellent. Thank you. Dawn.
I mean, what
If you have
do
no
I?
expectations? I know.
I mean, I like to get out of this, just kind of getting to the point with new people coming in of how we're all going to collaborate together. And be the most effective that we can be with like 5 different representatives with different interests, different people talking to us, and different competing ideas. Where is the common ground, and how do we best work towards things that we can actually accomplish?
From my perspective, I always like this meeting to result in some clarity about what town administration, how town administration communicates with the board as a whole, board members individually. A little review of maybe of how that has happened in the past and what it ideally kind of looks like. And to see if there are any changes to that. And more importantly, maybe, or equally as important, is what is the board's, as a board's expectation of town administration as it relates to things it wants to accomplish, but also things that individual board members might want to accomplish or follow up on or discuss or have town admin work on. I have gone through times when one board member is driving something that it turned out not everybody was on board with. So now we've spent a lot of time on something that never happened. So just a little clarity about that.
And Tom.
Yeah, I think as a new board member, very similar to what Dawn said, is I'm interested in learning what everybody has to say. And in my previous role, working for our state representative, being a staffer is a little different. I did attend a bunch of select board meetings and it sort of was my job to watch them. So I kind of know the general process, but being in the seat, so to speak, now is a little different. So kind of just getting up to speed on how the board members can collaborate and what you can and can't do, obviously being observant of things like open meeting law and things like that. But just sort of seeing how best we can all work together with what we are and aren't allowed to do.
Oh,
Well, I think my colleagues have said it all. I think it's a matter of learning to work together and making sure we really agree on priorities.
Erica,
Oh, I'm not part of this.
well, you're sitting.
I think probably along what Libby said about just the expectations and, listening more.
Yeah, substantially given what Libby said, I think governance discussions are always about sort of who owns strategy and vision and who owns execution. How do they overlap, and how they don't overlap, and when strategy and vision changes, so changing forward, then we need to think about what may change and what we're executing.
And last but not least,
And Matt is on his way.
he is, oh, excellent.
Definitely pleased. I know I'm being important. Similar to what everybody's saying, but also to add on to it where, like, how do we weight or weigh the values or the importance of all these different projects? And then how do we assign resources to get them done and those expectations? Because we have a lot of things that are important to be done. And it seems like we have a lot of cream on top. And I just don't know how we get it done timely and properly.
You know, today will be more about the process and how we get there than what we're going to do, because that really will be the bigger focus in October.
Yeah.
I think the discipline around the piece that Libby said, well, what if somebody just really is interested in this one thing, and kind of how do you all agree that town admin should be responding to that? As we work through the governance questions, I hope we can address that, because I think that's an important part of this dance that you all do in kind of, you know, working collaboratively together. The words I heard from you all, just working together, being collaborative, communicating with one another, making choices, process, those are all good things that we can touch on today as we wade through the questions on governance. So the governance question, we can probably advance the slides if you don't mind. Keep going. So we have a series of questions. There's a couple that just the board will address, and then there's others that I really want to invite Libby and her team to weigh in on also as is appropriate. You don't have to weigh in on everything, but if you want to add, you're invited to do that. But, you know, kind of first in this, and I know you know each other, but this is a chance for you to really get to know what's motivating one another and what is, you know, why it is you chose to be here. So the way we'll do this is we'll start, whoever would like to get their first answer over with. We'll have you address the first question, and then we'll go around and just, you know, kind of let each member of the board respond to a couple of questions. So the first one, what's your personal motivation for and commitment to serving on the select board?
Sorry, I was thinking
It's like,
if I like to be punished.
So I was like, I don't know why I do this. My colleague, John Nalbandian, who was on the city council in Lawrence, Kansas, he imagines that if people could run for re-election, but then not have to serve, that they would do that. It's like, you want to do it, but you're not really. Tom, since you're the closest one to the election and you, would you mind jumping in on this and just kind of sharing what was it that motivated you and what's your commitment?
The positive or the negatives?
Yeah. You can talk to a therapist about that, the positive stuff.
The positive side would definitely be it's a very, very interesting position. You get an excellent, maybe the best overview of what's going on Nantucket and the town and county. You do get to meet lots of interesting people. Some of them are upset about something, and that's completely their right, and it is their their right to come to you and complain about whatever. Definitely there are many positive comments as well along the way about serving or trying to do people's business, et cetera. I think my own personal motivation would be that I try and be a consensus builder. I really, I went to school for this. I've worked in government for a while now. I've worked in campaigns and politics. I really enjoy the process. And I believe that government can make people's lives better in a lot of ways. And when you work together, politics is the power of the possible. And Nantucket is blessed in a lot of ways with resources. And there are things that are possible here to do good for its citizens and our visitors alike. And I think that many other folks have laid the groundwork for that over many decades. And it's why the town is an amazing place that it is. I'm very proud to serve on the select board with my fellow colleagues and town admin and the residents of this island. It's a special place, and I'd like to just play a small part in helping doing that.
I might come to somebody, I love this, the politics of the power of the possible.
Yeah, not me. That's not my quote. That's
You said it, I heard you. say it. You said Tom from Nantucket said politics.
Plagiarist, great.
I'll say Tom said somebody said this before. So I sometimes will preface these reprieve by saying I work with John L. Randy and a lot of the professor from the University of Kansas. And sometimes when smart things come out of my mouth, it's just John talking. It's the wisdom he's imparted on me over the last 30 years. Malcolm, how about you? Welcome, Matt. We saved a great seat for you.
That's good. Thank you.
And we're just on the very first question, so you missed.
Well,
our
that's-
expectations.
I was stuck on Orange Street
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
with someone doing something. I don't know what.
Than it is.
You always need the. Welcome
I
to
know, but it's all
August.
right.
Malcolm.
Well, so unlike my colleague, I don't actually like politics at all.
Wow.
But what's my motivation? Well, it's actually Libby's fault that I'm here,
Wow.
because when last year, when I decided to go off the Board of Health, she wrote me a very nice note that said, thank you for your service and all. And I asked her, I sent an email, I said, well, what can I do now? And she said, well, the fire chief position's open. And I figured, well, I wasn't qualified for that, so I had to do something. So I sort of got involved in this. But my whole family has always taught me to get involved in the community. My uncle in a little town outside of Rochester, New York, was a town councilman for years. And I remember going to his campaign rallies, walking around the neighborhood for him.
I don't think so.
He was quite a man, but I've always been told to volunteer, to be involved in your community. So since the fire chief position wasn't open, obviously, I had to do something. So I decided I'll pursue this opportunity. Again, to serve the community, because I do not like the term retirement at all. So I'm at various times retired from various functions, but
See,
so this-
from something to something.
to something else. So this is my present occupation.
Present. I like it. We started with, I don't like politics, and another quote that somebody said sometime in a room that I was in was, there are some people who suffer politics because they love government, and others who suffer government because they love politics. And the reality is you need both. You need people who want to be part of the process, who want to be members. Matt, we come to you because of how we're going around the room. And so we're answering the first question, which is, what's your personal motivation for and commitment to serving on the board?
motivation, I would say, was comprehensive plan 25 years ago. I got involved. I thought if, you can sit on the sidelines and complain, or you can be involved and try to help make things better. So I started out doing that and enjoyed it. And since then, I've been, when possible, I took some time off when my kids were, sort of growing up and playing sports, but other than that, I've tried to serve as much as possible.
Complain or just get involved. Complain or make a difference.
Get involved and complain. You can do.
Yeah. You complain.
So I would say, the step from other town involvement to running for the board, was driven by a growing understanding that priorities and funding are established at this level. And as much as I was adamant I would never serve at the board, I felt I could accomplish more in more subcategories of, housing and human services. What I came to realize is that this level is really important. And what I've come to learn that is the reason I love it is it's a huge complex puzzle. And you push here, it bubbles out there, and understanding the allocation of resources, human resources, financial resources across the entire system it's a complex process. And then I was reading Nat Philbrick's book on George Washington. And in the epilogue, he quotes Washington, but then he goes on to summarize, and I'm just going to read it to you. Washington didn't need to be right all the time. He just wanted to make things work. He understood that feasible change is not attained by righteous indignation. It's understanding that the road ahead is full of compromises if life is actually going to get better. And I want life for Nantucketers, for staff, for everybody to get better. And then I would say that the last thing is that I work a lot with underrepresented communities through the human service work. And I really, really feel it's important that I channel their voices until they have in our governance structure a way to serve themselves, which isn't feasible to a lot of folks right now. So.
There was a guy named Mark Funkhauser, and he was editor of Governing Magazine for quite a while. Before that, he was mayor of Kansas City, Missouri. Before that, he was city auditor. But before that, he was in human services. And I heard him speak once, and he said, I learned very early that if you want to take care of the people, you have to take care of the money. And so it's kind of that same idea that ultimately, if this is where the decisions get made, then that's your best position to help people. So. Brooke, how about for you?
Dawn,
Oh, shut
that happens in the media too, by the way.
And I know the difference. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Colgate.
Yeah.
There is one of those.
Oh, yes.
Right.
I feel like I've been doing some version of this like my whole life because the school I went to was a democratically run like alternative education school, and I chaired our our school meeting. But it felt like it, between working for the town and then serving on the HDC for so many years, I felt like it was kind of a logical next step. And I felt encouraged by a number of people for it to kind of be someone who was at the time a little bit younger with younger kids, and that kind of voice wasn't so heard in the upper levels of town government because of the time commitment. And I felt, and I had the capacity because I had been doing those similar hours in HDC meetings. And this broadens the horizon dramatically. I feel like I've always had an approach where I can take in what everybody is saying and my mind can be changed, which I think is kind of important. So I just now that I'm in it, I feel it's hard for me to step away and like let things fall.
Yeah,
Which I think that's very.
that's why you
familiar.
keep writing. Yeah, that's probably quite good, man.
Yeah.
Good. Would you start with the next one, go to the next slide? So each of you kind of comes from something. You've mentioned the HDC and we, you know, we do things in our personal and professional life. And they give us a perspective. It's not the job we come to when we join the board, but it's a perspective that we can offer. So what's the unique perspective, Dawn, that you bring? And how do you think it can help the town and the board?
I think I can remember that unique perspective is that I served in some kind of form of government throughout high school and college and locally. I've been on both sides of working for the town and serving. At the time when I came onto the select board, I was the only woman. And I wasn't the youngest because Tobias was on them.
When you worked for the town, what'd you do?
And I had, you know, two kids in school here. I worked for the HDC first
Oh,
and then
okay.
and then for the planning board.
Yeah. Tom, how about for you? What's the unique perspective that you bring? How can it help?
I think working for our state rep's office gave me another good overview of the town in a slightly different perspective. A lot of home rule petitions and budget amendments and things like that. That kind of ties into what Dawn was saying, excuse me, what Brooke.
One of them.
We gotta go out and all the way to.
What Brooke, exactly. What Brooke was saying about how it all fits together, and when you push back on one thing, it bubbles out on the other side. Like that's exactly right. And then I sort of I've had sort of an all over the place experience in the community. I've worked in retail here. I've done freelance computer work. I've worked for a couple nonprofits, work for a nonprofit now. Very involved in the racket sports community here as president of the Rackets Club, and served on a bunch of boards. And so I kind of have this, like, I don't have the kind of like, oh, I have kids in school, so I know all the parents, but I know all these like lots of different pockets. So I think that's, and also in my job, I work for Nantucket Food, Fuel and Rental Assistance, or the Interfaith Council, and the programs that we have. And so I see exactly what Brooke was, that very much identifies with what we do and why that job is very important to me, to help represent those folks. Anyway, that's sort of from my experience and my perspective, I think I can bring to the board.
That is a broad swath of the town, from the racket
Yep.
sports folks and the helping with food and fuel. Like,
Yep.
we're seeing the people that live on the island. And serve them. Thank you. Malcolm, how about for you?
That's a great question. I could say my unique experiences, I've been coming to Silent for a long time and I've seen it change significantly. I've been on a lot of nonprofits. I was chairman of the board of Moran Mitchell for years. Pascon, my first foray into government was the Tick-Borne Disease Committee years ago, where we wrote a wonderful report and it was nicely shelved somewhere. I'm not sure anyone's done much about it, which it bothers me that we sometimes do that in this town. I guess my real unique experience, I grew up in a culture and a work environment, a scientific one, where you challenged almost everything. So I think my role always has to be to question and challenge.
And when you question and challenge, what are you striving for?
To truly understand, from personally to truly understand it, to make sure everyone understands it.
So it's not sometimes people experience questions as almost like, you don't agree with this, you're attacking this other
No,
idea, but
no.
you're doing it from a place of really wanting to understand it from a different perspective.
Yes,
That's
and
important to
it helps. I think you challenge and question somebody, it helps them too. It helps them solidify their arguments. Or they'll find out they don't have a good argument.
Yeah. Not everyone experiences that way, so I think it's good for. to
Well, I
say
know,
it.
I
So
know,
thank
but
you.
that's
Yeah.
just the way
Yeah.
30 years of my life,
Yeah.
I was challenged almost every day.
And I'm sure, being on the board of health during the pandemic, there weren't any challenges there either. Matt,
I would say, well, I would call that, I tell my employees all the time, it's correction, not criticism.
Ah.
Yeah, it's, I'm asking a question, I'm asking you to do it this way to correct you, not because you're a bad person.
No,
And so I think it's interesting that is the perspective sometimes. Why could you question me? How can you question me? I'm working hard. Sometimes it's, it's important. If you understand something fully, you can explain it. You can tell somebody why it's the right thing to do. I would say my perspective at this point, I have some institutional knowledge. I would say Libby and I and Erica. I think this, we remember the old stuff, from 30 years ago that maybe has been forgotten or maybe has been shelved. I think I have my upbringing in a small business and operating a small business for 40 years and understanding how that has changed on Nantucket over that time and the difficulties growing up in that kind of family, I think is important to bring. And I was educated as an economist. I like numbers and I like those types of arguments and those types of understanding. I look at things kind of through that bit more of a business lens. And so I think those are all different aspects that I bring.
I didn't know about your economics background. How about for you?
So I've been a summer resident and a year-round resident, I've been
Okay.
both. So had that experience. And then education-wise, I bring a master's in social work and a certificate in mediation. So a thinking process and analytic process based on those education pieces. And then expertise on the housing stuff. I mean, I've been deep into that for 7 years. And so in the nitty-gritty and every day, understanding that. And then I also chaired the Council for Human Services for a few years. So bringing that perspective and I'm on the board of a nonprofit in human services space as well. And so an understanding of how human services are provided here, what the challenges are, what the limitations are, and less the finances and economics and more the individual, the individual human impact of decisions versus a more of large scale economic impact. Neither is better than the other. They're different. And I think it's good that we bring all of those perspectives to the group. And frankly, a fascination with that puzzle I talked about before, really, really fascinating. And my willingness to talk to pretty much anybody.
Well, now we want to talk about Dawn a little bit. So Dawn is filling this role of chair, and so we're actually not going to talk about her, but we're going to talk about the role of the chair because it's unique. On your board, you choose the chair, and you have expectations of that individual, both from the perspective of qualities and attributes that they might demonstrate that are going to best serve the interest of the board and community and admin. And then from the roles and responsibilities piece, but let's talk first about qualities and attributes. And I'm going to start with Brooke, and we're going to go around the other way this time. And I am going to invite Ruby to participate in this one. And I don't know if you want Greg and Rick to chime in as well, maybe that just from the perspective of town admin, kind of. What is it that you're, kind of the, again, qualities and attributes versus roles and responsibilities that you might be looking for from the chair, so.
Well, it's been helpful that this didn't happen when it first happened, because I've been in agenda setting meetings and that's been really educational for me, but I think the chair ultimately has to be the filter of what goes on an agenda. And so listening to all of us and town administration and understanding when and how we address the things that we're all thinking about trying to accomplish as a collective. A willingness to listen, a level head, and a sense of fairness and an ability to set aside personal priorities for the greater good.
A little selflessness there in that last comment.
Yes, because the role requires representing the five of us, not just the chair's perspective in its best iteration. I think I don't think it always turns out that way in some communities or some places that have this governance structure. I actually think our current chair does a pretty good job of that, and a really good job of that. And I hope that will continue to be the case here going forward. And it's always imperfect.
So listening, level head, fairness, being willing to set aside personal priorities. Matt, what would you add in terms of qualities and attributes that you're looking for from the chair? You've been the chair, you've had a few chairs and you're.
Oh, I haven't been the chair. I've been
You
the
haven't been
vice
the
chair.
chair.
No,
Okay,
I
sorry,
haven't been.
never been the chair.
Never been the chair. I think Brooke got most of it. I do think sometimes I've served on boards where there ends up being a bit of a split. And I think the island is a bit split. As we've noticed on some of the issues. And I think that, I would like to be co-chair, and I think, and I've made that clear. Because I think that's a better representation of the island. I think that's a better, I think there's some things that we could sort of finesse our way through that Don and I did previously, that sometimes I think doesn't happen now. I think sometimes we get kind of stuck in our ways and just make a vote. And maybe it could have been, a little bit, we could have pulled the community together a little more. I think that and I know Don is trying, I'm not saying that as a criticism. I think that there's, each of us represents a different part of the community. And I think when some parts of the community don't feel as though they're represented, I think that's when we have a little bit of the problems that we have. And so I think that it's enough, you have to be inclusive, but you also people have to feel like they're included. They have to feel as though if they're complaining or they're upset about something and they want it done a certain way, I still think they have to, honestly feel like they've been heard, even if it doesn't go their direction. And sometimes because we're so busy and staff is so stretched and we're also stretched, sometimes I don't think that it comes across that way. So I think somehow, setting the agendas and having enough time for someone to do some of the public outreach and some of the public stuff, I think is really important to kind of pull us back together.
So I kind of picked up from that, just the bridging that divide is an important quality, being able to do that, being inclusive. And maybe even more importantly, helping people feel heard. So
Yes.
it's one thing to listen and then kind of also impart on those who are sharing that encourage you. So good. Thank you. Greg,
Do you want us to?
Libby's nodded her head, so if you have some thoughts.
Well, listening, sure, it's a tough job. I don't know if anybody want to be a select person and be the chair.
Be led with that.
It is everything, especially what Matt just said, it's, the ability to compromise. It's a very split island, sometimes a split board, and it's a challenge. So I guess it's that ability to be firm and fair. And let it just roll off your back, like not to be able to carry it with you, because I think it's probably a really tough position to be in. And things could stick with you. So, and then just, I guess, the ability to absorb so much. I mean, just the agenda meetings, there's so much going on, and that's just what makes it to the agenda. Meetings, you know.
So don't carry it. That's good advice, a hard quality. Rick?
I think, I agree with everything that's been said so far. There's a whole breadth of soft skills and, listening skills and that type of thing that are required. I guess I'd like to just add to it, like, strong vision, strong strategic thinker, strong prioritizer. And willing to reprioritize and strategies change. That ability to deal with that.
Erica? No, thank you. Nothing.
Qualities of that, to the chair. I think it's pretty much all been said. I think John runs a pretty good meeting. When I've been chairs of things, I've been criticized because I tend to like the meetings go quickly. And I think that's good. And I really don't have much else to say about what's already been said.
But running efficient meetings. Easier said than done, for sure.
Easier said than done.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, a couple general things and piggybacking on some of the other comments. I think it's a good thing, or it's always a good thing when the chair of any board, a lot of people will come to them or will be the first point of contact because they have perceived as the most power, right? Which is true in most cases. And I think it's very important for that chair to describe if it's a contentious issue, for them to describe if it's in a general sense, like say it were my point of view and it were an issue that we disagreed on, right? In this case, the chair might say to a constituent, oh, well, they feel this way, but not disparage that, but lend credence to that my colleague, that in this case, my colleague has a disagreement, and that's fine, but not to put words in their mouth, but to sort of generally lay it out there and to try and, again, kind of be the general consensus builder and not be a bomb thrower, I think is really important. I also think to not favor any individual or group during a meeting. Dawn certainly doesn't do that, but that gets very unequal and inequitable. And also to administer the rules equally. If everyone is getting 3 minutes for comment, everyone gets 3 minutes for comment. If it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. And kind of being consistent and serious about those rules. I think it's very important for the community to see. And I think the board has done that, certainly from what I've seen.
Yeah, great points. Libby, what would you add from the perspective of town admin? Like, what are those qualities and attributes that you're looking for? From the
So,
board chair?
a lot of what was already said, of course, but also for me, the chair needs to run interference a little bit with other board members, with the public, with people who have agendas and things like that, and help guide what is the priority. There's a big difference between people being listened to and heard and action. I often hear, well, nobody heard us, nobody listened because their thing didn't happen. That is not listening. So to the extent that the chair can understand that and convey it, there's a kind of a deflection that we need sometimes to help minimize the distractions that are out there for town admin. I'm just gonna say, social media is really difficult. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of lies. There are a lot of personal attacks. And it's hard for us to respond to all of that either quickly or effectively, because we can't respond with personal attacks. We can't respond even with facts sometimes because they are personnel related or in executive session, or it wouldn't be legal to respond. But boy, would I have a lot to say to some of the social media attacks because they're just flat out wrong. So I don't want to go off on a tangent there, but to the extent that the chair can help sort out, it's important to focus on this topic that's coming up or not, because that's not a board priority. Listening. I think it's important for the chair, all board members, but the chair maybe most of all. Well, I don't even know about most of all, but listening to what, somebody says, oh, we want to do such and such project or initiative or whatever. Really listen to what that means on the town admin side and what it will take to do something. We often try to sort through things at the town admin level by thinking through, okay, so-and-so wants to do XYZ. Here's what that is going to take, rather than quote, no, we can't do that. We can do anything. We can't do everything. Understanding the charter is important. Everybody, of course, needs to understand the charter, but it's also kind of helpful for me that the chair can give feedback to me. Maybe other board members have a particular issue or concern or whatever. The chair can sort of filter that a little bit. Is it an important thing for me to pay attention to? Is it something I don't need to pay attention to, or is it's just a distraction? So there's a lot of communications between the other board members and the chair and me, although I think I communicate with all of the board members individually pretty routinely. So that's my perspective.
John, I am gonna let you chime in, but I'm gonna wait till the second question and have you kind of absorb it
Oh,
and
okay.
respond to it, and Matt's got.
Even if town administration wanted to respond to social media, they don't have enough hours in the day to do it. The other thing that I think we've missed is the chair is responsible to hold, is the first person to hold staff accountable. If we have a big issue that's coming to us and hasn't been fleshed out, that's the first chance to say, geez, we probably need some more information, et cetera. And that's a tough role. If you're, that's a tough role, because there are some things that want to come to us in its policy, but we have to have the background of the policy to make a good decision. And that's I would say that's one of the hardest things.
Might reorganize and bump that to next month.
Till the work is done, or, or that's hard though.
Can I follow up a tad on that? I agree totally. It's sometimes, it's really important for us to know when something isn't quite ready yet. And we don't always have the perspective of the board on that. So it's helpful for it to come through the chair. At the same time, though, sometimes when we think we've covered everything, a board member will bring something up in a meeting that we either didn't think about, or it was not part of our discussion with the chair or whatever. So there is the kind of, I don't know, it's not a random thought really, but it's things always come up that we didn't cover or we didn't think about. I shouldn't say always, it happens. And I don't know that we can 100% cover all aspects of an item 100% of the time. But it is helpful for the chair to be able to provide input. I think, so-and-so might want to know about X or whatever. So that is helpful.
Yeah, and people have different levels of information needs too, and just kind of navigating that is almost impossible, like to get it right every time.
Yeah.
Too much to it. Do you want to go ahead, Libby, and start the conversation about roles too? So we talked about qualities and being level-headed and fair, but firm and inclusive and bridging the gap and deflecting, holding people accountable, good communicator, giving feedback. So I'm ready to run into another room right now. But set aside your personal priorities for the board, some of those qualities and attributes. But then there's roles and responsibilities that you really expect and need the board chair to fulfill in order to effectively support the work of the board and the work of the town government. So why don't you start there?
Sure, I would reiterate everything I already said and what people already said here, but also back to the sort of interference, running interference comment. sometimes there's people either outside of town or inside of town government that are looking to the manager for something or a staff person for something that really isn't our purview. So I rely on the chair to go and talk to that person about it. And I think in Dawn's case, not to focus on the individual, but she's very good at going to immediately talk to somebody about whatever the issue is. It's not a, months long thing. Well, I didn't talk to them yet or whatever. So that is very helpful. And again, the board, either through the chair or sharing with the board members, having a solid understanding of a particular issue so that when they hear it, maybe outside from their constituents or the public or wherever they are, they have all of the facts. And I mean, even this week, I heard something that people don't have all the facts about. Of course, it's on social media. It's not even factual. So to the extent that people have that and can either through the chair or wherever convey that, it's helpful. We often get, maybe this is for a little bit later in the session, but something that we just sort of continually struggle with is often constituents or others email the board members and they have a question or they have a comment or they expect a response to something. And either nobody responds or one or two people respond and they're different responses, or nobody quite knows what to do. So often we don't even get that email. And I try to not intercept it exactly, but kind of get a feel for what the issue is and let the board members know either through the chair or through an email to all of them. I suggest we respond this way. Don't reply to all. Just, let me know what you think so that, and we'll develop a response back based on your input and feedback so that it's not, the town admin position necessarily. But it gets tricky sometimes because sometimes it's not something that it's a policy matter, or it's a kind of a random, let's save the whales in Asia kind of a thing. Who's going to respond back? Maybe it doesn't really need a response, but people like to be responded to. And we just need to figure out a little bit more effective way of who's going to do the responding.
Yeah, and especially if it is a policy issue, and it may not be a priority of the board right then, so it's not something the town's gonna act on, but it may be something that people care about. But people could have different perspectives on how they care about it, and so it's easy for you all to get crosswise. But then the reply all, I assume you say that because of meetings, like you can't do a serial meeting, so
Right.
Not only is your job difficult, you have to be really careful about how you even respond to emails because you run into the possibility of having a debate.
Yeah, and it also might be something that's already been addressed
Yeah,
and it's over, but the asker doesn't think it's over.
so that's where I would imagine you talked about communication. The communication between the board chair and you on things like that would be really important. So that weekly conversation or just checking in.
Yes.
Tom, how about from your perspective, the roles and responsibilities that you need the board chair to fulfill?
Yeah, I would echo my previous comments about administrating rules equally and et cetera. That's very, I think Libby is on it just in my short, whatever, two-ish months. I noticed a couple of things that we've been emailed randomly to the board. And then Libby's very generous with her time, and we have a weekly meeting where we go over any questions on contracts or the agenda and things like that. And there's been a couple times when somebody random is emailed and I said like, oh, did you receive this or were you copied on it? And so I think that's, and I think that should be the chair's position as the head of the board, to kind of speak to, so we're all on one thing. And maybe it's an issue that we all disagree and maybe there isn't one response that I could see that happening. But for something, I don't think it does anybody any good to have 3 or 4 board members sending different responses. That's when that feeds the fire for social media, and it's, I mean, on a controversial issue, you know, these are benign, what I'm talking about, but.
So that speaking for the board, even when the board hasn't decided what it as a body wants to say. And so that's that kind of the role of setting aside your personal, well, this is what I think, and I'm not sure what my colleagues think, but really setting it aside and saying, you know, this has not been a town priority. My colleagues we have a lot of different opinions on this, and we appreciate your perspective. It's not something we're prepared to respond to, or it's not something we're going to address, but kind of that's that. Speak for us, set your personal opinion aside and deflect things. So, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes saying no here, this is not a priority, allows you to say yes to the things that are. And so helping do that, navigate that. can be really
You have to set some realistic expectations.
hard.
So realistic expectations sometimes for people on
Yes.
the timing and the kind of work that goes into something.
Mhm.
But I will often direct someone to go speak to another board member as well, who I
Yeah.
know has a very different opinion from me.
Makes sense. Yeah. Good. Malcolm, how about for you?
Well, one solution is just don't look at social media. And that's sort of my present,
Don't look at it.
I'm just not looking at
Yeah.
it.
It's
I
hard though
haven't
when
even
people
been
send
reading
it to you.
Yeah.
See this?
Well, when people do that, I say, I'm not on social media for a reason, please don't.
Yeah, I just don't, anyway. What roles responsibility expected chair to fulfill? Well, if you listen to this conversation. And all the roles that we want the chair to perform, this is actually a full-time job.
Yes.
And that's what really strikes me, so we can talk forever about. Of course, we're all agreeing what the role should be, but I mean, this is an impossible job. So, I don't know what else to say.
Okay.
Maybe she
Anything
should,
Possible.
maybe she should ask for help from us more. I don't know. Because it's
Rick, I'll come back to you and I'll just note that, you know, you talked about vision, both in your expectations and in kind of thinking about the qualities. So I'm interested to hear how you link it to role now. So since you've got a theme going.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm kind of relying on general governance framework, which is the board of directors, the select board is traditionally responsible for vision and strategy, and then administration or management is responsible for execution, and we need to be able to. I'm not answering this question.
No, I was teeing it up for you to answer the question about roles. and
Oh, I see. Oh, well,
With
then
the
my,
vision.
then my answer is I don't have anything to add besides what we said,
Oh,
so.
okay.
But,
So that prompts you now.
so then I think, you know, then it comes back around to administration, which to be able to articulate what kind of resources we need in order to carry out that strategy, and then we gotta go to the select board, gotta provide it. If it's part of what you want done, then we need to have the resources to do it, but I don't think we can ask you to determine the amount of resources that are required, because it's not what you do every day, and, you know, the complexity of, what were we talking about yesterday? Was it our island home we were talking about? No, search that area roads, and the complexity and the man hours that go into that project. You know, appropriated $13 million for it, right? But there's 10 people putting in 5 hours a week minimum, right? And we end up with regulation change midstream, and that project has literally exploded from waterways west of the airport to a whole, you know, road layouts with flight paths now where we're moving utilities, and it's just like, there's no way. So my only point is, the requirement comes from administration back with what we're saying. If that's a priority for you, if that's what we're gonna appropriate money for, then we gotta make sure that it's good.
Not much to add, really. I was gonna say, actually, Mom kind of gave me to it, is that it's a full-time job to really put your, your whole heart and soul into it, because we're such a big, complex community. So like, roles and responsibilities change daily, you know? And I guess that's it, just being, willing to work with admin and vice versa to get things accomplished.
Yeah, I agree that it's a full-time job at this point. Thinking back to what Libby was saying about sort of, replying to people, I'll look at the emails. And if it hasn't been sent to Eric or Libby, I forward it to Eric, so it's so we have it. But I also try to help if there's, if it's coming from a group that I know, can take bad news from me, I'll respond to every one of them. And, and I try to do that.
Good, how about good news?
Well,
No, but in particular.
No, but like sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's good news, like this is all set and taken care of, and yeah, we're fixing the pier, and not only are we fixing it, we're actually fixing stopping the water from breaking it next time. So there's good news like that, that's great to give, but there's, when Surfside Crossing, use that example, when that started, everyone there thought that we could stop it immediately the next day and could get, take care of it. And so I wrote back to every single person and I said, this is unrealistic, you're gonna have to negotiate with them and blah, blah, blah. And I sort of, I'm not sure how much good it did. I think it slowed it down a bit. And a lot of people didn't listen. I think if they had listened, it might have gone a little differently. But the same thing happened when we did Richmond. Every single person that wrote saying, don't connect these roads, I wrote back to every one of them and said, this is good planning. We should be connecting the roads, to Meadowview, et cetera, or it's gonna take you an hour and a half to drive down Old South Road. So I went back with the reality, saying, we should be doing this. It's too bad we aren't, and you're not gonna be happy about it in 5 years. So there's times I think like that where, I think giving the reality of a situation, we don't have enough money, wish we did. We don't have enough money. Sometimes if it's someone that feels comfortable enough to write individually to one of us, I think, I worry sometimes about sanitizing and trying to talk with just one voice, because sometimes I think the various voices connect with different people, so.
And maybe one of the things the board chair can do is help figure out who that voice is that can connect the best and say, hey, Tom, this is a group you might really connect with. And so would you be the one to send this response or not, whoever it is, but kind of knowing your colleagues well enough and knowing those audiences.
Yeah, she's done that.
Yeah, add it to your list of things to do. All right, Brooke, and then we'll give you a chance, Don, to chime in on these.
A willingness to sacrifice one's life is. But the thing I have a question about more than anything is, right? The chair and vice chair and town administration set the agendas, right? We have, and so the process by which individual members' priorities or things that they want to work on move from my idea through the chair and town administration to becoming an agenda item. At what point, so we need to have a discussion about whether we want to move it forward, but it has to go from somebody's idea. And how is that even within governance regulations and open meeting law? What is that process? I think I'm really curious about.
It's something you just don't know.
I just don't know. Like, for instance, as chair, can Dawn ask all of us whether we want this thing on the agenda, or is that a serial meeting, right? Like, to even get it up for discussion, right? So that's, so I'm really
Tom had
curious
an
about that,
idea that he wanted to put on the agenda.
Right.
The question is, and if you all don't have a rule and procedure around that, I certainly know how other communities deal with that question. And here.
I mean, we have to follow the open meeting law.
right.
And technically, anything that you discuss among the five of you can only really have to do with time, place, date of an agenda.
Right.
everything else is supposed to be spoken about in a public meeting.
So how the heck
So you put things on.
do the other board members voices
Select
about
board
what
comments
goes
about
on?
What they want.
Yeah,
And I
so-
know in other committees, that's what they do, like, there's an other business section, and that's the opportunity for people to raise what they would like to see on the future agenda.
And.
But it's
there's-
not allowed to be discussed.
Right.
So I can say I wanna talk about e-bikes. But I don't get to hear from the other members whether they wanna talk about
But,
e-bikes,
but the way
right?
you do is, it becomes the question, I'd like to make a motion that we put e-bikes on the agenda in 1 month. Is anyone else interested in talking about e-bikes?
I think so.
And then
Or
you
you
get consent to do it, and that's how I see it done in other places. There's also a gray space in between where it's like, okay, we're gonna talk about e-bikes. What do you expect Libby to do? Do you expect her to do anything, or just put it, have an item that says the board wants to talk about e-bikes, have a nice day? Or do you want to hear from the police chief? Do you want to hear from the traffic and transportation? Like, what is the level of effort that is necessary?
And yeah,
This
that's
is,
when the agenda meeting
Yes,
bring up those things.
and how do the voices of the other 3 board members get to the agenda meeting if we can't? Under open meeting law, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're just gonna have to do what we have just been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Under other business or select board comments at the end or at the beginning. I wanna talk about e-bikes. Anybody else? No, 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 no. Okay, we're not talking about
Or you
e-bikes.
just put a
Or-
specific agenda item on.
Right.
Board discussion of potential agenda topics.
That would be fabulous. I like that.
That, what Erica just said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do that.
have it
Yeah,
as
we
an
could do that.
agenda item. So
So
what I
that
would
way-
say is.
Like maybe
be-
monthly or
Yeah,
something,
be
we have that,
mindful.
sure.
I would have it every
Well,
week.
So what you want to be careful of is, if you have it there so that you can decide if you want to talk about it in the future, that's fine. If it becomes kind of a, well, now we're allowed to talk about anything, then it can really take over the meeting. The other thing, if you have a other business or select board comments kind of expectation, that's where you do it. It doesn't create an expectation on the part of the public that, okay, we have a special agenda item called, what does the select board want to talk about in the future? And nobody ever says anything. What's wrong with you people? It's like, are you setting an expectation that all of a sudden now, every meeting, what I want to talk about in the future, I better bring it up so people know what I'm interested in. And I don't think that's necessarily a great dynamic for a business meeting, but if there's a place where you can accomplish the task, so make a motion, do 3 other people want to talk about e-bikes, great. We will talk about it at the agenda setting meeting and put it on a future agenda. That's easy.
So can we take action in the comments section like that, what Julia said?
on a
Select board
motion.
reports and comments.
You can certainly say,
Or
"Hey,
consensus?
this happens all the time. I feel
We
like.
wanna talk about it.
I wanna talk about e-bikes. You bring that up tonight under one of the 2 select board comment or report items.
Mhm.
And if everybody else says, sure, yep, let's talk about e-bikes. Then we'll just.
Yeah.
Through you
Great,
2
we'll
we'll
put it on
just-
the
Decide
future
what needs to
agenda.
be put together for it.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I just the
Yeah,
whole open meeting law thing,
Right,
like, and how this filtering process to the agenda setting happens is
Yeah.
new to me, so.
no, it's important to know, it's also like very leveling, like everyone now knows exactly how, if you have something that you want the board to talk about, how you can get it on an agenda. But I was running in a community last week where the mayor actually got to say, no, we're not gonna do it like that. The mayor didn't vote, but the mayor could decide what goes on the agenda, so it's kind of like a chairperson, but kind of what does your process allow? And that makes it, just knowing it, I think, can make it very easy.
Well, and I think this process, it could be super helpful because what I hear from Libby and from the rest of town administration is we don't know where to spend our time. And if it's the idea of a single board member, and I'm guilty as charged, bringing ideas, right, that are important to me. I'm mindful of not trying to garner administration resources without knowing whether it's a direction the board generally thinks, not necessarily a decision direction, but a where we should all be utilizing time and where we should be asking town administration to find time.
Yeah.
And you know, and I'm also very mindful of if we go here, what are we giving up? What must we give up? Because it's not an infinite resource. People.
As long as we're not, deliberating,
Right.
you're not making a decision, you're not deliberating. I think that's,
Well, you'd be making a decision on what agenda item is gonna move forward.
yes.
Yeah.
You know, what topic you'd want to move forward as an agenda.
Yeah, but if Brooke says to me,
But-
can
but
you
the
believe the
discussion-
mayhem out
but the
there?
discussion
You know, we
should
had five-
happen then.
Yeah, we had 5 people nearly killed yesterday or, on e-bikes. That's not, we're not deliberating. That's, that's just, 2 people having a conversation saying, yeah, it's mayhem out there.
There's a line there too of sort of making a big statement about an
Yes.
issue that's
Yes.
not on the agenda.
Getting into the content.
To then decide to put it on the agenda, it should just be like, we're gonna need to talk.
Are
about
you guys
this.
interested in talking about this?
Um,
I'm worried
a little
about
bit
this. or-
more.
Yeah,
Um,
And then it's yes or no.
Yeah.
okay, cool.
So Don, we invited you to listen and they told you at the very beginning that being level-headed and listening was an important attribute. So you've heard some of the attributes and qualities and roles. And what's your response? Anything they're saying that's not realistic? And do you have an ask of your colleagues in all of this?
No, I think they're pretty realistic. I mean, I think people do need to recognize that this is essentially still a volunteer position and like when I considered what, knowing that Jason would be stepping out of the chair role, whether I was ready to do it again. I definitely thought about the additional responsibility that it brings because just even in the meeting, you are so much more on duty than everybody else. In terms of reading the room and keeping things moving, you have to pivot, there might be something. You could end up with 30 minutes of public comment and then all of a sudden you're halfway through the agenda and it's 8:30 and nobody's making good decisions anymore. And you might take things off and say, we're not going to talk about this tonight.
Yeah.
And you got to just kind of recognize some of those things. And it takes, it's time, it's perception, it's, but there, there's a number of, aside from just setting the agendas and the ongoing agendas, there's all the regular kind of business that we have to deal with aside from sort of bigger things that we want to start digging into. And you've got to weigh how much time do you think this is going to take and what things should be paired well together. What things are the most noise out there in the community where we need to say something sooner rather than later? What expectations do we need to set about like a big project that people want to happen tomorrow? And you have to tell them that's like a decade out if we start now.
Yeah.
So, and then the chair writes a letter for the annual report. There are some additional responsibilities. The chair gets asked to make speeches and to show up for things
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And just keeping up with the volume of email when you have huge volume of emails in all of your other points of life that is really hard. I mean, it actually would help if occasionally one of you says to me, like, did you respond to that? If you think that it's something that got missed and is really important to get back to. And it's the chair's responsibility to organize doing the review of the town manager. There's extras that but I think one of the biggest things is running an efficient meeting, following the rules,
Yep.
making sure people are heard, both board and public and staff. Being sensitive to the fact that there are things that we can't discuss that are personnel issues that we get a lot of flack for, and Libby gets a lot of flack for, and it's really unfair.
And naming that can be really an important thing that you are in a unique position to do. It's like, I know people want us to talk about and comment, it would be irresponsible for us to do it. Like there are things that you're in this unique position to do. I also kind of heard you maybe ask for a little bit of grace, because sometimes you're gonna use your discretion, it sounds like, to say, you know what, we're not making new decisions anymore, we're gonna push this for 2 more weeks or push it till next month. And some of your colleagues might not like that, but in your role as chair, it sounds like that's something that you might take the prerogative to do upon occasion. And so just remember that in the moment when it's getting late and there's motivation there is to make sure that you're in a position to make good decisions together.
I just wanted to add to that too. I mean, even before everybody got here, we were looking at agenda items and, you know, it might be something that's very important to 1 or 2 board members. And we know it needs some discussion, but we're not gonna put it on immediately because next week's discussion is gonna be really big about something. And we wanna make sure that it gets the proper time and attention of the board. And so to really, as Don said, find that balance and looking out on the calendar where we could fit it, where it could really get the proper attention.
Yeah, it's really important. So the calendaring of things.
And when a board member is not gonna be present.
Right, exactly.
You know, that's an important piece too.
Making
Yeah, and
sure
all the
you have a
ro-
full board when you've got something big. coming
Yeah.
up.
all the roll call votes from remote add time to stuff that you have to do and you have to look back and raising hands and you and Erica kind of deal, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
and even with like the appointment process, we had to think through because Malcolm was in Italy about how are we doing that? So it's totally transparent in terms of the vote. And we had, you know, a 10-minute discussion on how to handle that in the agenda meeting.
Yeah.
Because can be the revotes and just all those pieces, you gotta have some perception and understanding of what's going on. And you need to be able to pivot.
Yeah.
And it's things like that that the public doesn't see and isn't aware of, but the board members, I think, and the amount of time that goes into all of that. It's not just somebody sent an email and said, well, it'll only take 2 minutes of the board's time. Why can't this be on? And I said, because it's gonna take days of time to prepare for it.
Yeah.
We don't have to be on the deadline right now.
Also just important for you all to have heard, I think, multiple people said it's a full-time job to be the chair. And Don led with, I'm a volunteer, and this is not the full-time gig. It is not what she's doing next. It's what she's doing now in addition to all the other things she's doing. And so kind of remembering that too, that you might want it to be a full-time job, but it's not. And somehow it has to be manageable in the system that you have. Well, let's shift gears, and there's a series of questions now that I really want Libby to speak to. And I'd like the board to listen to kind of what she has to say on these. And then you all will all get to chime in also, but there's 3 questions that we're going to ask Libby to respond to, and then we'll again get you all to chime in. So the first one is, and you've been doing this a couple of days, decades. What's the ideal relationship between the board and town admin? And what are some things that you do or will do to foster that?
Okay, so I think some of the components of the ideal relationship have been already kind of addressed. Communications, obviously. The board, for me, the ideal relationship is that the board members obtain a full understanding of certain projects, proposals, initiatives, activities, and have a decent understanding of what is on our plate. Communications, I think, is important, and I think all the board members are pretty good at it. If they hear something from a constituent or another board member or something like that, and they're not sure about it, or they need more information about it, I don't think anybody hesitates to ask. And that's helpful, and it puts it on our radar. Is it something we need to spend some time on? Okay, we didn't do the greatest job telling the board about all this. So I try to, when responding to something or presenting something, give some, I have a little sort of structure in my mind about giving some background, giving where we are with it, what it's going to take, how much it might cost, who's involved, that sort of thing, not in a long drawn out way, but so that people understand a lot of things take a lot of resources to enact or implement or even start. So acknowledgement from the board about those things is very helpful. Support from the board is critical. Especially when new initiatives or ideas are being proposed, and it's sometimes hard for the public to understand, because again, it's also hard for us to get out either the true facts about a situation, because it's either not public or it's personnel matter. But there's often, there's a lot that goes into something, as Rick referenced. He and I and Greg spent some time the other day going over, like, even for this meeting, even what would be a good case study to tell the board of a project gone wild. And the Surfside Road project is ideal. There have been permitting changes, regulatory changes, personnel changes, which have resulted in some setbacks, timing issues, prioritization with some of the resources involved being dedicated to other things. It's a gigantic project, and it takes a lot of town staff resources. So sort of like acknowledgement from the board about that. We've talked previously about, well, what can we take off the plate to add such and such onto the plate? It never works like that. Nothing significant ever really comes off in a way that actually frees up enough time to dedicate to getting something big done. So maybe we need a little more discussion about that sort of thing, but sometimes I feel like, it's not that I hesitate to do that, but I start feeling a little bit like a broken record, and oh yeah, so it's hard to do, and you just don't want to do it, and there's takes too much time, blah, blah, blah. Well, we're already spending massive amounts of time on things, and I think it's safe to say that a good amount of upper level town administration staff in no way works 40 hours a week. And even if we did, we physically in the office, we don't, because whenever any of us is out somewhere, somebody's going to ask us something, and we want to address it and correct it. Same with the board. I know the board is approached by constituents constantly, but we want to have answers for people. And so I don't really, depending on what it is, necessarily mind when people ask me something, because if it's a chance to answer a question and have the person leave feeling or go away feeling like their issue was addressed or will be or whatever, then that's a good thing. So I think support is very, very important. And the way I foster it, I guess, is I try to tell all the board members the same thing. If something out there is happening, and I think it might come to the board by a constituent or some other way, I try to give them a heads up email. Sometimes things come in by email, and I forward it to the board, FYI, and here's what we're doing about it. Or in the sort of rare instance where the board and town administration is sent an email about something, I try to do my best to coordinate an initial response as quickly as I can, given the amount of email going on. And just say to the board, I'm planning to send this response. If anybody has a problem with it, or if you want it on the agenda or whatever, let me know by Tuesday at 4 or whatever, name the time. So at least there's a centralized response. And what by that, what I mean is a clear centralized response, not what Matt was kind of saying earlier. There could be a couple of board members who agree or disagree with whatever the email is about. That might necessitate an agenda item, and not a response from town administration. The person might be told, we're going to put it on the agenda, or we don't have an answer right now, or whatever. So I try to keep the board members informed. I have one-on-ones with 2 board members right now, and then the agenda setting meeting. 2 board members haven't really asked for that, but I don't feel bad about it, and I don't think they do either, because I think they get a lot of information from me by email, and if either of them need to know something, they do not hesitate to get in touch. And so that is my
the next question is about strategies for promoting open communications and constructive dialogue with board members and town, and so sounds like one of the things you said was share information, the same information with everyone. Everyone gets all the same information. So that's certainly one strategy. Other-
I think, a strategy anyway, I feel like this board is very, has very much open communication, especially with the public comment section of the agenda. But also the two items on the agenda that allow for the board to present reports or comments or whatever. And not that those things necessarily can have actual extended discussion at that time, but they frequently are put on a future agenda for some kind of discussion. So specific strategies,
So what I'm hearing you say there, and I want to is use the agenda development process, or kind of use your agenda items to make sure the discussions you want happen in the future. Kind of there's structure in place, use that so we can have a good conversation about it, not a in the moment.
yeah, I routinely send out to the board, I try to do it once a month, but sometimes it's more like 4 to 6 weeks. A meeting schedule, and it has all the Wednesdays for the year, and it has all the topics that we know of. Now, obviously, going out further, those topics are a little more not defined, but there's also a list at the end of top items that have either come up at a meeting that the board wants to discuss in the future, or when particular items might be coming up annually, like the tax rate setting, or the liquor license renewals, or town meeting, thank you.
Long-term agenda.
Yeah, so they get that. And that at least gives them a little bit of a preview routinely into what's coming up. So that if anybody so hopefully, if anybody has a particular item that they might want to work in or talk about, they can sort of think, okay, well, maybe we could talk about that at town meeting discussion or whatever. So I guess those are the sorts of things that.
And the board's been, next question, has been doing this strategic planning process now, at least since 2018. We've had other versions of goals and priorities, so the board priorities. How do you see your role in supporting the board's priorities? And how do you kind of imagine working together to accomplish those things?
Well, I think the town manager's role in supporting the board's priorities is kind of standard throughout most municipalities that have a charter and a town manager form of government. The board's priorities are either expressed through a strategic plan or some other type of plan, or through some consensus at a meeting as to we want to work on XYZ, or through the town meeting warrant, the capital program process that the proposed projects are brought to the board for review annually, and they let us know what they want to prioritize or not. And so far as supporting those goes, I think we want to let them know what is it going to take staff wise, resource wise, money wise to implement XYZ priority, so that they can weigh and evaluate those things and make determinations. We only have so much staff, and those people can physically and mentally only do so much. We're not 24/7 people. Even though sometimes not board, but other people think that. So I think we need to let the board know what it's going to take to accomplish something. And I think we do that. Maybe we need to do it more. I have realized over the years that through specific feedback that the board typically doesn't want to hear, we don't have time to do that. They want to hear more like, why don't you have time to do that? Or more importantly, we can do anything you want, we just can't do everything you want, but here's what it's going to take to do a new thing, or finish off the current things, or should we put this maybe not so important thing because this new thing has come up on hold and take up the new thing because that's more critical right now. So communications, of course, are critical. and communicating the factual information. I mean, I'm very, very mindful of, I try to be very mindful of, the board needs to know the background of something. And sometimes there might be a newish idea that a newer board member might have, but we've actually talked about this already, and here's why we didn't do it. Or here's what happened with that idea. So being able to provide the background of something, okay, maybe there's a different way to handle it, and it didn't work because of whatever, it wasn't planned out, it wasn't structured properly, didn't have enough money, didn't have resources, whatever. So communications about the what it's gonna take.
Good.
Could I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Your last comments were talking about how something new will come along and you'll say, well, we'll take something off the list, but it never does happen. I mean, should you be pushing us more to take something off the list?
Good question. In fact, we've talked about this a little bit internally, because it's hard to say, like, it's hard to quantify it. What would we take off that we're already deep into working on?
Well, sometimes that's just some costs and you have to do it. I mean, I
Right.
get the sense that we're all overwhelmed, or the town is overwhelmed just by issues, the staff is overwhelmed. And I think maybe we have a strategic planning session coming, or maybe sooner, we should just say, okay. Well, let's just stop that tomorrow. And really focus on what we think is important.
Mhm.
I think 2 years ago, or last year, you did a good job with that, like you really did actually take items off. our strategic
That's
plan.
like, we took
It's a-
little stuff
To little
off.
stuff off, but what it doesn't account for is the stuff that happens. The strategic plan doesn't account for all the things that just come up.
Yeah,
You know,
The
and maybe
day-to-day.
e-bikes is this month's example, like, that's not part of, yes, safe transportation is part of your strategic plan, but who knew this was coming at us, right? And so how you all navigate that is really a challenge. Pardon me? COVID, yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Can I just give a little example of something that
Sure.
just comes up? So, again, we've had a lot of discussion about this internally. Housing and real estate have exploded. And we in no way have the resources to manage it. It is managed in a murky, uncoordinated, messy way right now. And through nobody's fault. It's because we don't have the centralized system we need, and we are working on how to structure it. But in the meantime, lots of things are happening. We have employees who need housing. We're trying to rent housing. We're trying to manage the rental housing. We're trying to manage our own housing. And we are woefully unstaffed for that. And we aren't gonna get staffed tomorrow for it either. So it's
only
just,
housing.
we're really struggling with it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of real estate issues, and it's not just yard sales. It's many, many other things that I have said this before, and I'll just say it again. When we established the real estate specialist position, I naively thought, I won't have to have so much to do with real estate now, and neither will Erica, and we'll save money from legal because the person will be able to do it. Well, quite the exact opposite happened, because now that people and other town agencies and departments realize we have a real estate person, that I have a 2-page double-spaced, double-sided, not double-spaced, single-spaced, tiny font, double-sided pages about all the real estate items.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just think, what happened?
And then you have someone who is in that job, becomes unavailable suddenly for
Yes.
months on end,
So we're
dealing
with that, hopefully, and in a variety of ways, but that's just an example
Yeah.
of something that cannot be put off. We have to have employees, they're gonna have to be housed, especially the ones that are critical of the functioning of the town. And it is taking way more bandwidth and resources and thinking than we ever imagined. The thinking itself, we don't even have enough time for.
You know, and there's a little bit of a lesson there, I think, because I see it time and time again. Anytime you decide that you're going to formally get into the business of, and so you have an office of, or whatever, whether it's, you know, sustainability or natural resources or housing or name that thing, it's great because you're taking care of a priority in a very organized way. It is not actually relieving creating any extra capacity for town admin, because you really just expanded the roles that you're in as a town government, which is great and what you should do and all of that, but it doesn't necessarily free you up.
Yeah.
And it creates enormous expectations
Yes.
in the community.
Yeah.
Yep, community, we had that position, why are you telling me?
Yep.
that's not?
And then you can't get rid of the position.
Right, exactly.
That's
We keep
even
taking
worse.
things off the list.
Because now,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the work, I don't know of any positions we've created where the work went away where we can eliminate. the
Yeah.
position. True. I don't see that. happening.
but we have to talk about what we're not gonna do. I mean, this is a nice conversation we're having, but we haven't accomplished anything. We haven't said, what are we not gonna do?
Well, that's strategic, that's our
yeah,
strategic. plan.
But we're also, but again, but I look at it as we're doing, right now, we're just, we're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
We're doing just what we have to do. You know, and yeah, treading water or falling behind and doing just what we have to do. We don't, you know, earlier, Rick said something about strategic planning and looking ahead, and that's our role. And I think to myself, we never get to do that. You know, we have the meetings with you, but we don't delve into the details of how we're gonna do it. We talk in general terms of the big picture, but we don't get into the details of we talked about housing, but we had a lot of info, but we didn't get to, okay, yeah, who's gonna do it? How are they gonna do it? When are they gonna do it? How much is it gonna cost? You know, we didn't get into the details of the plan. And so we've got so I think we have a lot of, you know, so we're doing like sort of just trying to keep the trains running on time with, you know, and it's getting harder and harder to do that. And so I wonder how, you know, so I'm not sure, we can't take away things that we have no choice we have to do. But the question becomes, can you reconfigure the office, you know, select board office, so it's, you know, Libby does this part of it and someone else does the other. Can we connect planning and, you know, in the office here better? Is there certain things we can do that will take some of this pressure off of each other? You know, but I think right now we're sort of in these different silos and not really, you know, some of it might be getting done, but it's not connected.
So perfect example of this is I'm really curious about a licensing board, right? Can we pull all of these public hearings off our agenda? Well, the amount of work it's gonna take to figure out whether a licensing board makes sense, A, and then how to get it in place, B, is another thing that somebody has to do. So even change
Good change.
creates work, right? And so I mean, that is, I feel it, you know, I feel it as a board member. I can't imagine how it feels for town administration, honestly. I just don't know. I mean, I find when I ask a question, it's important for me to ask questions, but it's work to answer my questions. It takes time, and so I think you're right, that treading water feels like where we're at. And
there's things that have to be addressed, like all these, like freedom of information requests. That's basically become a full-time job that it wasn't supposed to be. And if anybody could get people to stop to like just ask their questions directly and stop making so much noise, that would be helpful.
We had, sorry.
Sorry, I wanna, Matt sometimes brings up the thought of expectations of the community. And I think town meeting sets certain expectations that's outside of the realm of the board and staff. When somebody puts something, on the town meeting warrant, like a real estate item, or if there's an appropriation and they think that it's going to be immediate.
Right.
And I don't know when that, like discussing expectations for stuff like that can occur, because I'm not usually part of the beginning process where they're like, oh, I want to put in a warrant article. But, that's a like sticky widget where, you know, we don't, the board doesn't have control over that. Staff doesn't have control over that, but it comes with such high expectations that it's gonna need immediate action and how to address that with the community. I mean, even when we do appropriations and we want a project to move forward, bids come in way over budget, we don't have the money, we need more appropriation. It's really hard.
Or a project manager to make it happen, right?
So,
You know, Libby led her response to this question was, it's standard role for the town, that's my job, as town manager, is to do the priorities, that's the form of government we have, that's what town managers do. And it can kind of sound, like nothing. But it's a really fundamental concept to the form of government that you have. And if I go back to Rick's opening statement about strategy and execution, like that's the execution piece. Your all's job is to identify the goal and the strategy, big picture. And it's Libby's job to get it done. And so to do the execution. So I didn't want you to hear that as like, yeah, that's just what I have to do. It's really fundamental and different from other forms of government that we have in this country, where she is accountable directly to the board to accomplish her priorities, even when they change. When a new person comes on and the priorities change, that becomes the job. So I just want to make sure you heard that way. And as Libby responded, she talked first about relationships and things that she does to foster those relationships. Then she talked about communication and how important it is, and then priorities. Just want to invite the board members to kind of just respond in general, kind of are there things that you either want Libby to think about or things that you want to do to foster these relationships so that you can effectively work together. Would you say amen? Thank you.
No, I mean, we've said amen and we had a great discussion, but we didn't change anything. I'm sorry. We didn't decide.
And we won't today, because we don't have time to do that.
Oh, but we
today.
always say that. I mean, I'm sorry, we keep putting things off.
The strategic planning will be for them. The strategic planning session will be for actual action,
Well, I hope so.
action items and
I hope so.
reprioritization.
But we need to
I
use
mean,
that
I'd like to
strategic
know
process.
how much of your time is the necessitated day-to-day compared to the big picture stuff. Is there any time left for the big picture? And how much are we continuing to be affected by empty positions or turnover and retraining? And I mean, I just think we need to recognize that, and the community needs to recognize that. And yeah. And then. I mean, there's the whole discussion about changing the form of government or. Making these positions compensated in a way that makes it easier to not have another job or something like that.
Anybody else on this? Serious question?
I'd like to respond to this Malcolm's point of like, well, we didn't accomplish anything. And I just want to throw out an example. So earlier today, earlier today, there was a discussion about the indoor athletic facility. And I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, well, if that's gonna be a thing, what equivalent thing are we gonna take off? Are we gonna get rid of our island home? Because they may be roughly equivalent, well, again, they're probably not, but those are really, that's a really hard decision, like not continue to add the shiny stuff onto our thing until we work through whatever the priorities are. I just wanted to reinforce your point. I mean, it's really hard.
So Rick, to that point, the people who are advocating for an indoor facility, I have said to them, that is not a town project. Figure it out and come to us with a plan for how we can, as a town, but that's not, but I'm saying, like, every idea can't
Right.
become go into execution. And by the way, how long have we been trying to do our island home?
15 years.
Yeah, an indoor recreation facility, to my mind, doesn't even come on our radar until that is. There's some other things that have been in the works for years and years come to fruition. Yay or nay, final
That
decision,
needs
yay or
to,
nay.
the full cost of the project needs to be voted on, and if it's.
If it's a no,
If it's a no, then it's another project, because we're gonna, the no means we're closing.
and by the way, I know we're getting into strategic
Eventually.
planning. For me, a municipal office building
Mhm.
is a higher priority for efficiency in government and actually making the getting all of this done easier than an indoor recreation facility, especially when private resources could be garnered to do that in the way the ice rink was done. So it's not necessarily a municipal thing when someone has an idea.
Right.
The why isn't the town doing this is a question I'm answering all the time or hearing asked all the time.
Why is it?
Yeah.
The expectations changed. When the Delta fields were built, that was with volunteers and we raised money.
Yeah.
And then it was handed over to the town, but it was handed over with the building done.
Yep.
And with the building, with everything, it was definitely needed 100%. But that was that was 30 years ago. And it wasn't, people didn't expect that. It was, you could just vote it at town meeting and then something's gonna be done.
Is it our job to push back on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have to figure, I would say yes, but how do you do that? Especially when I pushed back a little bit on,
Risk not being reelected.
yeah, well, I pushed back on do you have PFAS floors? Do you put that inside? And got somebody like yelling and screaming at me, but sort of.
Yeah.
It's this, anyway, I just think, we have to push back, but it has to be concerted and.
It plays into the open space plan and the
Oh, all of it.
future and all the pieces and.
All right, last question is, sorry, go ahead.
Just very quickly on very little things, but that go a long way that I think help us all work together from the town manager and from admin is Libby and Erica always send reminders whenever we have stuff like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days out, which is really great because sometimes when you don't respond to one of those calendar invites and it doesn't go onto the Outlook calendar, like I forgot that land bank thing was next week, and you sent the priorities yesterday, that, I could have scheduled something for work or, any of us could have. So those are helpful. The silver sheet, as you pointed out before on the agenda, that's helpful for oh, well, might take a vacation in December or something. So it kind of what's on the agenda, what's happening then. I think those things are really helpful for me as a new board member, just trying to figure it out. When am I going to look at this? Where do I need to be? And then how can I fit in the rest of my life at the same time?
Yeah.
So that I think those are minor things that go a long way.
Okay, last question in this series for the board. What do you hope that this board will be known for? Okay. Brooke.
Really aggressively addressing housing for town employees and for the community at large. Implementing, using the funds the town has entrusted, the voters have entrusted with us to get the job done.
Matt.
Yes, except I agree with Brooke, except I think the town has to focus on its own needs first. Otherwise, we can't take care of the other needs. I think the money that we're getting for housing needs to largely go to town employee housing and solving those issues. Otherwise, we won't be able to do all the other stuff we need to do. And that needs to happen quickly. I think that needs to happen very quickly. And it needs to be housing that any of us would want to live in. It needs to be designed in a way that we'd love and in a place that we'd love. And, so. Anyway, that's.
So housing for town employees.
Yeah. And then I think the rest of it is, how do we you know, how do we bring the community, how do we bring the community back together a bit? And I feel like we've got a bifurcated government, I feel like we have a bifurcated community, and I feel as though, you know, there's one side that's, you know, that feels one way, and you know, one side wants to preserve the islands, you know, and how to, and keep it nice, and another side looks at it slightly differently, you know, they want to preserve it, however, for what they're getting from it, and it's just, there's two sides almost, and it doesn't split Republican and Democrat, it kind of it kind of splits whether you want to, you know, subsidize continued growth here or whether you don't. And I think it's not a Republican Democrat thing. So how do we as a community bring that together so that both sides realize, okay, we still need this, you know, and this is helping us. That would be, so I would like to bridge that a bit more. And I think it's been a while since we've had that together.
Wow. I totally agree with Matt. Some things he said about the need for housing for our employees. I think it's wishful thinking to think that we'll always have everybody agreeing with each other and we'll always be split on those things. That's just the way human nature is. Just to put another one on the board, with really starting. What kind of reinforced today was this Matt's comment of treading water. And I would like to see this board get us swimming again, and not treading water again. Get into a boat. What does that mean? Town government, the people are working hard. The board has not done our job, perhaps by getting the real clear priorities. I'm just bumbling on here, but I'll mumble on for a while. Sorry. Do we need to, oh my God, help me. Do we have to have a consultant? I hate consultants, nothing personal. I used to work as a consultant. To really look at how government is functioned internally. We talk about a new government structure. Do we need a new town structure, a new administrative structure? I think someone needs to look at that. So of all those things, I think I'd like this board to be known for one that got us reorganized, got us in the boats, and got us out of the water.
Thank you. Tom.
Yeah, similar to what Matt said, I think lowering the temperature on some of these issues and having the select board be as the town's governing, but you know, the highest body, along with town meeting, of course, and communicating well, responsibly, and lowering the temperature, I think would go a long way for us to be out there in the community. I think explaining and communicating as best we can through, I don't know, letters to the editors or forums or attending neighborhood. I know Libby and Dawn and lots of us do this kind of stuff, but I agree with what Libby said before about sometimes people just need to know information. And not that we all have unlimited time, the board members, but I think just going to some of these, you know, habitat ribbon cutting for the houses and things like that, just to be there and answer questions, a board member, I think is so important. And that kind of stuff goes a long way towards just getting information out there. I also think, and my kind of most macro point I could say is some of the stuff I think Nantucket faces are due to macro forces, and people get upset, right, some rightfully so, and in good faith, most of the time, but they are not controllable in some ways. And I think that if individually or as a group, that sometimes you need to delineate between, look, government can't do everything, or you know, the state of the economy or the ship of state, you can't turn it around. Like we are subject to these. We are sometimes we are at the mercy of being reactive because these forces are not controllable by Nantucket Town and County. So if that's speaking with one voice or at our meetings and making comments, I think there's some of the issues that we could that just communicate on that would go a long way.
Thank you. And Dawn,
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that for a second because that is so true about setting like community expectations on what we can and can't do. Like the pollution of the harbor is more than 50% atmospheric. We have very little local control over that. I mean, we can control what we can control, like massive sewer projects and fertilizer regulations, and those are all great, but it's still not going to turn things completely around. But then we can be I want us to be known for being leaders in things like shellfish propagation to bring back this more robust scallop industry, for an example, in relation to the harbor water quality. I want us to be known for creative solutions, and Nantucket's been known for this over time for many different things. Creative housing solutions, creative environmental solutions, and creative transportation solutions. You know, every other day people are like, why can't we ban cars? Well, and my question back is, are you giving yours up? And nobody wants to. I mean, we all drove ourselves here. I think mostly. Did anybody?
I tried to get a bike, I had a technical challenge.
Electric car.
e-bikes, right?
Yeah, e-bike.
Not that kind. I actually have to move my legs to make mine go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mine is not a motorized.
Yeah. All right, just acknowledge it's just before noon. I know people might be needing breaks, but if I give you a break, we're not gonna have time. And so I'm just gonna say, take care of your needs if you need to do that quickly, but let's just push through. Plus, there's not that many opportunities to. So we've got two other topics. One is your October meeting, kind of what you're hoping for, and I'm gearing a little bit of that in this conversation. You know, what are we gonna say no to? What are we really gonna say yes to? But I also wanted to give you a little bit of space to talk about your business meetings. Just, you know, you spent a lot of time talking about how important it is for the chair to do certain things relative to your meetings. Do you have other things with regards to your business meetings that you want to talk about at all? If you don't, that's fine. I just want to give you the space.
I mean, I wouldn't mind hearing, is there anything that we kind of do regularly, like we did take off doing all of the quarterly reports in favor of doing something else? Are there other things with the way the agendas are structured or what we're prioritizing on agendas? that would be
Well, we did mention,
helpful to know.
licensing,
Yeah, that's on.
and we're gonna talk about this, or?
Yeah, I think we talked about doing that in September, because your next meeting after tonight, the 16th. Has,
Appointments.
That's gone.
It's on the 16th.
no, the licensing, I think
yeah.
we're talking about, potentially,
next
right now,
steps, next month.
tentative, September 13th.
Yeah, well, that'd be great, because that would, to me, I'd rather be talking about other things. It sounds like it'll be complicated, but it's doable.
I think the quarterly reports, I agree with taking them off. I look at sort of when we started and where we were, what is it, 4 or 5, 6 years, 8, whatever it is later. And they served a unbelievably good purpose.
Yeah.
Because it trained the department heads and the staff to work with Brian to be able to do present them, to understand the department from an economic perspective. It was really good, and it probably wouldn't have happened without Brian. No offense to anyone else in this room, but he was, he's really been, it's worked. But I think so. what's the next thing that needs to have a focus? You know, what's the next thing that needs to have a focus like that? That would actually, and I don't have the answer to this, but what that would actually move us forward a little bit better. You know, what is it that would help staff? What it was, it would help, you know? Because having a focus on it has improved that immensely. What is the next thing we need to do like that? Because I think having, you know, that accountability, having to come up on the camera, you know, once a month, once a quarter, and, you know, and present has, you know, has a lot of value.
Perhaps it's housing related.
Maybe.
Just to pick up a tiny bit on that. One of the reasons, the main reason, the reason for the financial reports, and at one point they were including reports on the audit, was because prior to Brian starting, we run a DOR watch list, we were behind in audits, we had a DOR report on the town's financial structure that was very critical. So we had real significant problems that were what's the word? They were sort of regulatory-ish. And
We did oversight.
I don't know if other people can think of what that we're in that sort of problem right now, but I'm not saying we don't want to report on something regularly, but now we have to prepare a report, and depending on what it is, we're gonna have to gear up to do that. So sort of recently, we've been talking about, and you guys kind of brought this up like months ago, replacing those quarterly reports with something else. And what we've been talking about is departmental reports. And perhaps for a time, we rotate among the departments and they come in and give a report about what they're doing. Some of the departments have strategic plans, some don't. We're working on that with them. Some have a lot of really interesting initiatives and projects and activities. There's probably a lot of things that some of the departments are doing that you all don't even know about. Or you kind of know about it, but it'd be really good for the public and you all to get more information on. Maybe it's things that we don't want to spend our time on anymore. I can't really think of anything like that, but
I think reporting on what's been accomplished for the public is also really important. Because that gets, for when it's done, it gets forgotten. And I think town administration deserves to toot their own horn in different areas of accomplishment in the space of our meetings.
You could, it was another option to have those town reports at a separate time, separate day, a certain meeting. Just a meeting of town reports. I mean, then, of course,
That's why
then,
I draw attention to it too.
and then, of course, then it doesn't offer us opportunity to challenge and question, ask comments, but. It's almost like having a television version of your monthly report. With the department, then we don't have to spend, that's another half hour or 45 minutes, we can be talking about. Housing or short-term rentals or pollution of harbor or something.
I'm not.
Tune in.
Yeah, I'm not really suggesting this or not suggesting this, but at one point for quite a while there, Matt you probably will remember this. The board set aside one Wednesday a month for a workshop, and it was dedicated to 1 to 2 topics, no more. And it was only discussion related. It wasn't action. It was for the board members themselves to talk about, again, 1 or 2 issues and sort of brainstorm or question or make suggestions or what will it take kind of thing. So I don't know, it might be something you think about bringing back.
Well, during our last meeting, we talked about the potential of setting aside on a periodic basis, the opportunity to take each strategic priority and have joint meeting with the boards that have input into that strategic priority. So there's a way to do this. I'm not sure whether it's reports or joint meetings or a combination of the two, but certainly that meeting we had here with all the other boards and representation from the department heads was really good in terms of what we all learned from each other. And to do that on a regular basis in a format where the public actually pays attention, which is our meetings, right? They do watch. I don't know about you guys, but people come up to me
Oh, no,
all week
we're-
long saying,
We're a popular item.
we are, yeah. And, they're watching and they're rewatching on YouTube,
So
so.
listen to it too.
Yeah,
Wow, that
on
was
the
great.
radio, yeah,
Read it.
Laura always chastises me when I forget to mention that. But I think there are opportunities for this and to me, that goes along with the, how do we offload something? Like National Grid petitions to
Yeah,
another group, because they are just a time suck and they're very rarely controversial, right? So it's how do we get it rubber stamped in the way that this process requires without it having to be us.
It could be us in a separate meeting too.
That too.
Even in the interim.
In the interim, so we work our way through.
And it would only need to be a quorum of us.
Yeah. So lots of ideas for that.
I think the key part of it, though, is the people who are charged with doing the work. Buying in and presenting. This is, I think that's what has worked with the monthly reports is that. They have to, it wasn't like us telling them what to do or us shooting the breeze about it. It was them owning their report and coming and saying, here's what we did, here's what I did, here's what my percentages are. We need to do it. I think Libby's right that it could be departments. Maybe it's rotating, maybe it's once or twice a year. I think it's someone sent me. I want to say it's like Dennis or somewhere. They have, we have our town report at the end of the year. They have like a monthly report that the manager, like, sort of like what you're doing, but it's, sort of a little bit more formal report of this is what was happening here in each department. And I'm sure it's written by the departments. And I know that sounds like a lot more work, but but there are ways that people do it that, that maybe could be, could make it a little more effective and make it easier for everybody.
Could also- I think somewhat related to that, when town people are making presentations, they need a little training on presentations.
Yeah.
Cause you can show what you want in 5 slides, not 20 slides.
Or maybe 20 are in the packet, but they only do 5.
Yeah, I mean, some of the presentations are absolutely fabulous and some of them are really horrible. So,
Some of them are. Yeah, and some of the horrible ones are consultants, by the way.
yes,
They're the worst.
no, I don't love consultants.
All right.
We couldn't.
Anything else then on the meetings?
Did we make any conclusions?
So,
We talk a lot, but I'm not sure we ever.
so what I kind of made the notes that I would see is that there's consensus to perhaps remove the quarterly reports. And then use the agenda setting meetings to determine how do we have the other strategic priority discussions, whether you need a separate meeting, engaging with the boards. And I wrote here separate meetings if needed to address specific issues.
Yeah, I like the idea, maybe a monthly licensing meeting that's separate from
And
Wednesday
licensing
night.
board. Yeah.
And that we just rotate who shows up for quorum. And so we don't always, all 5 of us have to attend it if we don't need to, and then also the public then knows, this is when licenses come up, right? It's
We'd have to figure out a time. that
yeah,
we
a
can
time would be
slate
challenging,
it
I
in.
get it. It's another, and it's another, and it's an idea. I would love feedback.
I'm fine with that.
Mhm. That's an intermediate step to creating a licensing board, or is it
Yeah.
instead of? The
While
intermediate
while we
step,
investigate.
While you investigate, okay. That's kind of how it- Okay, well, let's just talk for a few minutes about October 24th. And so, we'll have this strategic planning conversation, but we're at a point, we've been working with Libby, and I know Janet's been listening to everything, and she's out there in the ether, so hi, Janet. When we're back here with you all in October, the strategic planning, the first one that I was involved with started in 2018. We've done a lot. We are very close to having a document that kind of documents what the kind of a look back at all the things that have been accomplished since that started. But how, I want to hear kind of what your expectations or hopes are for the session on October 24th, in part because, there's been a lot of change on the board since 2015. And it's your chance to shape the next strategic plan. And also this kind of, how far do you get into things? What do you do with the things that have been priorities? If are you willing to say anything's not a priority anymore? So what are you all looking for at that session? And I don't know, maybe if there's anything you wanted to add and team this up.
We have a meeting later on today to talk about the prep for this meeting, and I am realizing, I don't think we've sent out a placeholder yet for this. So Eric and I can talk about that a little bit later. Right now, we're talking about Tuesday, October 24th.
October 24th, that's what's on my calendar.
Is it 9 to 1?
So I have it on the calendar from 9 to noon.
Yep.
This will be what I say to you all. I know you don't like long meetings, nobody does. That's a challenging window of time to get the work done. And if we could go longer, I think it would be helpful, or even if we do Monday afternoon for a couple hours and then Tuesday morning for a couple of hours. But something like that would be.
So, we've been talking about setting this up, something along the lines of town admin gives you a fairly quick, no more than 30-minute update on the current plan and what implementation has occurred and what accomplishments have occurred. Any challenges, any suggestions, anything like that. And then we have a facilitated discussion about that Julia will handle about what you want your next strategic plan or your updated strategic plan to reflect, right?
Mhm.
So we've been working on, and we actually have a kind of a report on, not kind of a report on what has actually been accomplished, what's in the works, what maybe isn't been accomplished yet, and why, and that sort of thing. So maybe it'll be more like 30 to 40 minutes, something like that, but not much more. So that's what.
And I think, some of the, what do you want your new plan to reflect? I mean, part of it is, what are the goals? Are they the same, which is a valid answer, those are still the ingredients to success. Have other things emerged, or is there something that's pressing that you all want to really focus on? And then I would say, even among the things that are your priorities, like how do they fall? Like I heard you say, like we need to do these things, but the first thing we need to do is have a municipal office building so we can have efficient operations. Like that sounds like a top priority, the first thing. And then we need to fix the house. Like, what are those things? Because all 5 or outcomes from 4, I think may not be in your all's minds. And kind of what's that messaging or how that works.
There's also a great deal of work that's been operationalized based on the research we've been doing this spring. And how much has been accomplished in this part of day-to-day operations now too, that could be shifted off the strategic plan because they're part of what's being done. That allows some either not add anything or bring in the priorities that you're now facing.
Yeah, I think one thing that needs to be on there is funding for coastal resiliency stuff. How do we, the group, how do we get that into the pipeline so that some of it gets started? The coastal resiliency committee is tracking 40 items that were recommended, and half of them are underway or some of them are done. But I think that's one thing. How do we work with that group and make sure that gets into the funding process? That's one thing.
And it's interesting, it's like something like that, which is a longer term problem to solve, right? It's not, we're not at crisis point. And how do we allocate resources? How do we keep something like that on track as not a now necessary, has to happen in the next 2, 3, 5 years necessarily, but make sure we don't get caught in 5 years too late coming to the table versus town employee housing, which is a today crisis, gotta all hands on deck, gotta get to this now thing to solve. So it's almost like there's the long-term things and then there's the immediate term things, and making sure we're allocating enough resources to the immediate term things, but not losing the long-term things.
We've used that framework of now you're next.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, like here's the things we need to do right now, and here are the things that are coming up quickly, and here's, you know, what's down the road you need to be ready for. Maybe we need to be doing some things to be prepared.
And I think, yeah, and I think some of it is sort of showing an interest in it with the land council. I mean, they're in land bank, you know, they've taken the point on some of this. But, and we're meeting with them.
Yep.
But I think that they're, you know, we have to sort of show some, show some interest. And if he's even just getting the funding or getting half the funding or doing something, because there are things in that should be worked on now. And there are some, we shouldn't wait 5 years, and there's some things that we'll do later.
Right.
And I think we have to show a couple victories, sort of Saskatchewan being a good one, that, we got our nose popped on, and it's a good chance to show, fix it and do something right. So I think so some of this is prioritizing it and then having partners that they're helping to do it. So it isn't just, something that's thrown at the staff.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Looking at all of the resources available,
Yes.
local, state, federal, and I'm not going to say grants, for all the reasons enumerated many times, but where are the partnerships? And even the indoor recreation center is a really good example of that. It doesn't have to be a municipal project. It could be supported by us and town administration in the smallest way necessary to make sure it fits in the puzzle without it capitalizing or using a lot of, or leapfrogging ahead of things that people have been working on for years and years and years that haven't been able to come to fruition because of resources.
Yeah, can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think it's also, how do we combat things that become really hot button issues that emerge from outside?
Right.
Like, I mean, I think the STR discussion is a perfect example of that. A lot of resources were being thrown at that from outside organizations and from just sort of changes in times. I mean, it could be as well, like the change in the form, potential change in the form of government. I mean, I think we all support that discussion, and we all supported the discussion on STRs, but it took over a lot of time and definitely jumped over other things and created new massive committees that need to be managed. And just how, regardless of which issue it is, how do we want to handle that strategically?
The pop-ups.
The pop-ups that take on a life of their own.
And I think I was gonna bring that one up as an example too, because it's one of those, the committee has done stuff, but then there's town council needs to be involved, and there's someone who knows the numbers, but then, has the staff itself, gone through how they're gonna implement, there's a whole bunch of things. So we're getting ready to possibly vote on something that, in my view, is, 70-80% there, not 100. And so then I'm spending a lot of time just trying to figure out, what we know and what we don't know. But I'm thinking, is that, so anyway, that's
Do
a
we
perfect
ever
example.
know enough?
Well, sometimes you can argue that, but anyway, that's a perfect example though of one that has, popped up, and we've put a lot of time into it, but it's still kind of not known and not all the way there. But we're heading, like the train is going down the track. And how do you get enough, sort of momentum, how do you get enough around it to understand that the momentums are going the right direction?
And what's the next short-term rental topic that the town comes to the party late? that it gets driven by citizen warrant articles or citizen initiatives. And then we're chasing, yeah, and then we're chasing it with town resources to try to do it in a way that works and is effective. And I'm not even talking about what decision gets made, but to your point, that's manageable, implementable, has the financial resources to execute once it's decided, right? We got behind the 8 ball on that and keeping an eye out for the next one.
Yeah, we're not gonna know what it is, unfortunately.
Right.
Marijuana.
Well, but short-term rentals, honestly, we knew
Yeah, we knew it was
3 years ago, this was
probably
coming.
5 years ago.
Yeah. But I mean, the first citizen warrant article
Was
was
3 years ago.
long before, and it took a long time for the initiative to get taken. I don't say at the board level, honestly,
Well,
so,
pop-ups will be there.
But I think she's bringing up a good point, is how do you control and direct the issue, whatever the
When do
topic.
you do it, too?
When and how, and, sort of like,
e-bikes is the next one.
How
for
do
me,
you
right?
dump it over other things?
Yeah, what?
And under what
E-bikes.
criteria?
It can you say no, or when it has to happen, how does that impact, like, do you all need to say, well, then you know what, we're not gonna be able to get this other thing that was important to us done, we just have to say not now to it. And that's, kind of a
It's
tough position to be.
like anything, running a business, running a lab, running anything, you're gonna have things that pop up and you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Yep.
The way life is.
EPAC has been talking about e-bikes, they've got some.
It's starting,
They have been for about a year and a half.
yeah.
Yeah,
They've
but
been out there.
e-bikes is next, my friends. It's
I
here.
can only hope nobody does.
At the risk of sounding slightly defensive here for being on the SDR group for 10 months. There are a lot of other communities in the Commonwealth and the nation struggling with this, and there are many other towns on the Cape and Islands even that are looking to us on what we did and thinking, wow, you guys got anything through a group? Like, good job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I give my group a lot of credit for staying in there when that all could have fallen apart many times for acrimony.
1000%.
I think one little other downside that not all of us were on there. And I'm not saying, oh, I know vastly more than matter. I'm not saying that, but like, there's some pieces where I feel like, okay, I have like a good handle on that. And then I'm not saying that you don't know more, you know less about it, but maybe that there's, if you had been in every meeting, it might be different. Obviously, that's a counterfactual, so you can't really prove that either way. But I would just give a little credit to the group and for select board, FinCom, planning board, coming up with this idea for a group that was, even if we just use the 70-80% definition, that's pretty darn successful for where a lot of other communities are, which is nowhere.
Yeah, and it wasn't, my comments weren't meant.
Yeah, no, I
they
know
did a
that.
good job, because they
Yep.
did a good job.
Yep.
And there's some really good ideas in there.
Yeah.
It's just, how do we get it? You're playing football and you have 10 more yards to go. How do you get the last 10 yards? right?
Well, we'll have that conversation tonight, everybody.
Well,
Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
But what feeds into that is that how much time you guys have spent with that, regardless of how good the committee was that put it together, is a lot of time was taken by the board to discuss it.
Yeah.
And one part that we're maybe missing, going back to Matt's comments about CRP and how do we operationalize that and keep our eye on it, and then, but some of it's really down the road. Is state regulations, like we're seeing now that things are gonna start changing with the state that the public doesn't necessarily see, but it takes our time. Like, we know we're gonna have to start now putting in new electric charging stations, like to meet our goals. Like, we have to do it, like the state's requiring us, but no one sees that. They see electric bikes and what are we doing about them? But at the same time, the same people that are dealing with that are now dealing with mandates from the state. And it just makes that a challenge.
Anything else on this? Expectations? So I think while we were talking, an invite went out from 9 to 1, which is the
Yeah.
first step. But how about 9 to 2?
Hold 9 to 2.
Same.
Both days.
All right, 9 to
Yeah,
2.
that's
No,
fine.
just fine.
Aye.
I know when
Can we
you're over
let
reach.
get
All right,
one?
so we'll.
Yeah, as
agree to
long
9
as you
to
feed
2,
us.
And you'll be fed. All right.
Oh, for that.
Coffee and food.
Okay, both,
I'm good.
fed on both ends, so there'll be stuff here for you on both.
Over
ends.
20 will have a better place.
And maybe we'll find a different
I could think
location,
of
although
before.
this has a certain, you know.
It's improved.
Did you get them that email?
It's, yeah, it's.
Look, it's, I'll show you, it doesn't, for some reason, it isn't. I mean, it's upgrade.
Dot did.
But I don't know how it was in here, but it wasn't showing.
And it went-
Every
and it
department
went
had got it
to
also.
Zoom.
And it made
had
it
a-
Zoom.
Yeah, who had the Zoom?
I have no idea.
Do you, were you using Google?
Yeah.
That's why.
I think
Because
everyone-
Google and Outlook don't mesh and
All right.
it just. weird.
Yeah, I
Weird
guess
thing.
That's why it
Google
wasn't
is-
populating my Google
Yeah, it's just,
calendar. and then-
it's just a
yeah.
weird thing that happens.
So new invite coming.
So can you
Can I
cancel it
cancel
and
it?
I'll redo, and I'll do it with a Zoom link when I get back.
Perfect.
Sorry.
October 24th, 9 to 2.
9 to 2. I was just saying.
The webinar. so people-
Remember.
But it, the Zoom link, but it'll be
And it-
understanding it's gonna
It'll
be
be
in
in
person.
person, may or may not
Will
have
be
a
in
Zoom
person.
setup, just
Yeah.
because of where we decide.
So do we really need a Zoom link or do we just need an invite?
I think,
It doesn't matter. We'll send it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something.
I'll just stick a
If
hole.
it's gonna be a public meeting though, I would like to maybe do it as a Zoom webinar.
Yeah.
Versus a regular. Zoom.
Yeah, see, mine used to do it, now it doesn't. Weird.
that way. we'll
But
crash
I
it.
mean, why wouldn't it be like we're doing right now?
Well, right now we just have staff, it's not. open.
But public could come in here.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
physically,
what I mean.
it's open to the public. physically.
yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Let's do a quick parting thought and then we'll let you guys get out of here, but just a couple minutes early, get on home in time, so. Parting thought. We'll let Dawn go last, but she's in a hurry, so. You're good? Yeah. Libby, parting thought.
Oh, I think that's. Well, I think this is very productive and I think, I mean, I do think the board has a pretty solid understanding of what town admin is working on and trying to get done and is faced with every day, because a lot of it comes to you all. So I think that's hopeful and I'm looking forward to the session in October. But I always appreciate this meeting. It's a nice check-in. And thank you.
Tom.
Yeah, I think this is good. I think anytime we can kind of communicate, that's not. That's outside of a normal meeting where we can sort of just have a back and forth is good. I think that helps us all get on the same page and kind of figure out where we're all at a little bit. Now, maybe not necessarily an issue, but just generally. So I think this is helpful. I look forward to the October strategic planning meeting. And maybe we can take some things off the table or put some more things on, who knows, we'll see. But yeah.
Malcolm.
It was nice, but it's nice to talk to my colleagues, but I'm still not quite sure what we really accomplished. We didn't change anything. Little discussion, we didn't change it. So it's nice to spend the time, which is all I can say.
Oh, yeah.
Erica.
I think it's nice for the board to have an opportunity to have a more free flow of ideas and exchanging thoughts. I feel like sometimes they're so limited in their regular Wednesday night board meetings and they're so limited by the open meeting law, so to be able to have this kind of setup for a meeting, even if, you know, there were no action items that came out of it. It's really beneficial to have that ability to just hash things out a little bit.
I guess for October, I would love to do that exercise we did last year on the wall, where we prioritize things. And then I'd like to take those prioritized projects and try and group them in like small, medium, and large lists, like how big are they? And then in my real dream world, if we stayed with 2 o'clock, it'd be great if we could agree the sequence of doing that. So that we don't end up with, 3 big projects without a timeline to it that's agreed by the select board, so that you guys then can deal with the other stuff that pops up. By having.
Thank you. Greg.
Was gonna add to what Rick said is that, yes, I love that exercise we did last time and kind of put the priorities on with the stickies note. But maybe this year we can also add, as we're thinking about it, who do we currently have on staff that would have to help do that task? So we can just try to assign right now, and maybe we can even group like, well, here we are now. Some of the natural resources now have 7 projects that grouped in here, but that's one person, like just to try to get a sense. And also, it's kind of what, but I know this wasn't really a governance meeting, but it was more of a strategic plan meeting, but where we've come from 2017 with our first sit down to do strategic planning to where we are now is huge. I mean, the board and it come so far. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. Like, I think we're really on the same page. We're focused in the same direction, and I think we're making some good headway, but we can do better.
Matt.
Yeah, I'd like to focus on 1 or 2 things really well. I would like to drill down completely into who's gonna do it, how they're gonna do it, when they're gonna do it, as opposed to being too much, macro. I'd like to get into the micro and a couple of big ones that are things that have to happen now. Myself, from a planning perspective, and that may happen with just us, or that will have to happen with, separately, maybe with the people who are responsible. That may, maybe we identify it and get part way, and then we finish it with staff and, and they all agree to it and what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, so that it's successful. And other than that, I think we're getting there, but I think I can't take credit for the treading water. Erica said it best. She said treading water, and I think it's true. We are. So we've got to find a way to continue doing that well, and then, go the other direction.
The resources. People resources. Really worries me. I really worry that. And I know everybody's scrambling and trying to get people hired and trying to fill positions that are just open. And I really worry the stress on town employees who are doing more than one job right now, is going to make the narrative that it really stinks to work for the town on some level. And that is a downward spiral we can't afford. And I know that a lot of this employee morale stuff, it's really important. It's small ways of showing appreciation, but and so prioritization falls into that, because if we prioritize and focus, then we pull pressure back in the interim. And I'm not afraid to say to the community, this is not happening because we just can't. We recognize this is important to you, and we just can't. Until some of these big things get time, attention, resources to get solved in a way. And of course, the thing that always, the undercurrent of that is always housing for the people who we need to do the work. So anyway, that's a strategic concern of mine. But this process of, I don't know how it's been historically, but this is really impressive to me as someone who's new to governance. The amount of communication we're doing between the board and town administration, and then that new thing we did with all the other boards, to me, is about building collaboration, problem solving, and shared vision, and getting everybody rowing in the same direction, and not wasting resources because people are going here and going there and then realizing they're going off. And I think even the Surfside project is a really good example of that. Yes, it's grown exponentially, but for good reason, because we're doing all the things that need to be done rather than doing it and then going back and redoing it, and which I think has been a lot of the history of too narrow a focus leads you to waste resources. So anyway.
Thank you. Dawn.
I find these really, really helpful to kind of get a feel for where everybody's at and what they what they want and giving focus. Just to a little bit of history with the strategic plan is that we did kind of think of it as a three-year moving plan in terms of actions with a longer term vision in mind. But that it was, what can we accomplish within the next 3 years? And every year we sort of check off, this is what's been done, this is what's in progress, this is what went nowhere. So when we're thinking about restructuring it at all, go in the fall, we'll go through all those things. And like, I like what Janet said about, there are things that have been kind of institutionalized now. They don't really need to be kind of on the board's top priority list now. It's completely in play. So I just want people to keep that in mind, that it's what we can accomplish within a 3-year period is what we're trying to focus on. And then we could recognize some things that we know are like a decade out that are, but some of the things are more like in the capital plan and how do we marry those things together? And then the open space plan and the master plan. All over the place, but
Yeah, those steps to, the vision might be long term, but what do we do today that gets us to where we need to be so that thing happens in the long term? So, well, thanks for your time today and for being prepared for these conversations. I do appreciate it, and I look forward to spending a little more time with you. Thanks. See you later this afternoon, Janet.
motion.
That's great. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I think I had a call.